Welcome to Sleepy Tales, a place where myths and legends are told slowly and softly to help you gently fall asleep. Before we begin, I'd love for you to share where you're from and what time it is where you are. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy relaxing stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a night of our peaceful tales. Now, settle in, relax, and drift off to tonight's bedtime story. Long ago, in a world full of gods and nature, there was a goddess who made fields golden and orchards heavy with fruit. Her name was Demeter, and she was the goddess of farming, harvest, and the natural cycle of life. She moved quietly among the earth, often unseen, but her presence was felt in every seed that grew and every grain that ripened. Her story is not only about the crops she cared for, but also about love, loss, and power among gods and humans. To know her story is to understand the life of the earth itself. Demeter was born among the greatest of the gods, a child of Cronus and Rhea. She entered a world already full of power, rivalry, and destiny. Her brothers and sisters, Zeus, Hades, Poseidon, Hera, and Hestia, were born before and after her, each carrying the weight of a family that would rule over all things in the heavens and on the earth. Even as a child, Demeter's presence was calm and steady, a quiet contrast to the flashes of ambition and anger that marked some of her siblings. The palace of the gods, high above the clouds, was filled with whispers of power, endless schemes, and the occasional argument that could shake mountains. In that world, Demeter found her own place, not in conquest or in fiery debates, but in the gentle rhythm of life itself. Her earliest days were spent under the watchful eyes of Rhea, her mother, who cared for all her children with a patience only a goddess could hold. Demeter learned quickly, not only about her family and their rivalries, but also about the earth below, which seemed so small from the heights of Olympus, yet so full of hidden wonders. She was drawn to the ways plants grew, to the turning of the seasons, and to the small, silent life of roots and seeds. Where other children of the gods might have marvelled at fire or lightning, Demeter marvelled at wheat, barley, and the fragile green shoots that dared to rise from the soil. She learned the names of flowers and herbs, the paths of rivers, and the songs of birds, finding in them a language that needed no words. As she grew, she moved among the other immortals with a quiet dignity. She played among her siblings, though not as competitively as some of them, and she observed the older gods with care. Demeter noticed patterns, how the earth responded to rain and sun, how the moon guided the tides, and how every creature, mortal or immortal, depended on the gifts of the land. This careful observation became the foundation of her wisdom. She was patient, understanding that growth and change took time, that nothing could be rushed without consequence. Already, she felt a deep responsibility for the life that depended on the earth. It was during these years that her connection to agriculture began to take root. She walked the fields of Olympus, where golden grain grew even in divine soil, and learned how to nurture it. She experimented with different seeds, observing which soils and waters produced the richest harvest. She learned the cycles of planting and gathering, the quiet labour that led to abundance, and the careful timing required to ensure that life continued from year to year. The immortals around her sometimes laughed at her fascination with something so ordinary as crops, but Demeter did not mind. She understood that what was ordinary for them could be extraordinary for the world. Her first recognition as the goddess of grain and fertility did not come with a grand announcement or a decree from the other gods. It came quietly, in the small signs of life that flourished where she tended. A field that had once been barren would bloom at her touch. The scent of ripening wheat carried through the air like a silent blessing. Animals seemed to sense her presence, moving calmly around her as if they trusted her care. And among mortals, though they did not yet know her by name, her influence was felt. Wherever seeds sprouted and bread grew plentiful, it was Demeter's unseen hand guiding the rhythm of life. Even as she learned these skills, Demeter's character was shaped by her awareness of fragility. She understood that life could be fragile and fleeting. A storm could ruin a harvest, a disease could strike animals, or a single moment of neglect could cause suffering. This awareness made her gentle but firm, nurturing but wise. She did not offer help blindly. She understood the balance of giving and responsibility. Her patience was not weakness, it was strength. A strength that came from understanding that life's bounty required respect, care, and careful attention. Her early life was also marked by observation of the divine politics that swirled around her family. She saw how Zeus would grow into his role as king of the gods, how Hades would become the lord of the underworld, and how Poseidon would claim the seas as his domain. She watched Hera's concern with family, alliances, and reputation, and Hestia's quiet dedication to the hearth and home. Demeter learned that each god had their own path and their own power, and she began to see hers not in the storms of conflict, but in the slow, steady work that supported all life. Her strength was not in commanding armies or controlling fire and water. It was in creating life, in sustaining it, and in understanding its needs. Among mortals, her influence began subtly. She observed humans planting their first crops, watching them struggle and succeed, and she felt a quiet satisfaction when they learned the rhythms of the land. Though she did not walk openly among them yet, her care reached their fields. Sometimes a crop would flourish unexpectedly. A harvest would be plentiful even when the odds seemed against it, or a famine would end in time for planting. Mortals began to sense a guiding presence, though they did not name it. Demeter, in these moments, understood that true power was not always recognized, but it was felt in the way life continued. Her connection to the earth deepened as she began to see the seasons not merely as time, but as expressions of her care. Spring, with its first shoots and blossoms, became a sign of hope. Summer, with its warmth and long days, was the time of growth and strength. Autumn, with its heavy harvests, was the reward of patience and labour. Even winter, with its quiet dormancy, was part of the cycle she guided, a time to rest and prepare for new life. In each of these cycles, she found meaning, a reflection of her own patience and understanding. By the time she was fully grown, Demeter had become a goddess who balanced quiet power with nurturing care. She was deeply connected to the earth, yet she understood the needs and fragility of all who depended on it. She had learned to guide growth, to protect the harvest, and to understand the hidden patterns of life. Her siblings recognized her wisdom, even if they did not always share her patience. Other gods sought her counsel on matters of fertility, growth, and sustenance. And though the world of gods was full of power, ambition, and sometimes cruelty, Demeter had found her own strength in the quiet work of creation and preservation. In these early years, she had not yet faced the great trials that would test her love, her grief, and her resolve, but the foundations were laid. She had learned to observe, to nurture, and to understand the delicate balance of life. She had discovered her gift, the ability to sustain the earth, to care for life, and to guide the rhythm of nature itself. This gift, quietly growing within her, would shape not only her destiny, but the lives of gods and mortals alike. And so, Demeter's story began in the highest halls of Olympus, among her family of gods, as she quietly learned the ways of the earth and prepared for the responsibilities that would one day touch every living being. Her life was a slow unfolding, a careful learning of what it meant to hold life in one's hands and how to give it with wisdom and care. The seeds she planted in these early years, both in the soil and within herself, would grow into a force that no god or mortal could ignore, and the rhythms she learned would guide the earth for all the years to come. As Demeter grew into her power, her attention turned more and more toward the world of mortals. Though she still moved among the gods, her heart was drawn to the earth below, to the fields and rivers, the hills and valleys where humans struggled and thrived. She watched them at first from afar, curious and patient, learning how they lived, how they worked, and how they tried to make the land provide for them. She saw that humans were fragile, dependent on the gifts of the earth, yet also clever and persistent in their efforts. They tilled the soil, planted seeds, and prayed to unseen forces for good harvests. Demeter felt a quiet satisfaction at their labour, and soon she began to guide them more directly. She taught them first to sow and reap, to understand the rhythm of the seasons, and to respect the cycles of life that govern the land. She showed them how to plough the fields so that the seeds would take root, how to water them at the right times, and how to gather the crops when they were ripe. She taught them to preserve grains, to store food for winter, and to share the harvest with their communities. She explained, though not in words they could hear, that life depended on patience, attention, and care. Mortals who followed her guidance flourished. Those who ignored it learned harsh lessons. Demeter also watched their gratitude and their mistakes. She felt pride when humans honoured the land and worked with it rather than against it. Festivals of planting and harvest became signs of respect, moments when humans acknowledged her invisible presence. The early rites were simple: songs and offerings, small gifts of grain, or the first fruits of a season. These acts were not meant to impress her, for she did not require praise, but they reminded humans that life and sustenance were not endless or guaranteed. Yet she also witnessed their carelessness: fields left untended, water wasted, or seeds trampled. In such moments, she allowed nature to respond, sometimes with droughts, pests, or failed crops, so that humans would learn the sacredness of the earth and their dependence on it. Legends grew of her influence, even as she moved quietly among the people. They told stories of her touch, of the sudden abundance of wheat after she had walked unseen among the fields. They spoke of the first ploughing, the first reaping, and the first bread, all gifts from a goddess who nurtured the land with a careful hand. Her connection to the seasons became central in human understanding. The coming of spring with fresh shoots, the warmth of summer and ripening crops, the heavy yield of autumn and the quiet rest of winter. Mortals learned to read these patterns, to plant and harvest with wisdom, always remembering that life followed cycles set by powers beyond their sight. Demeter's influence extended beyond the fields. She understood that fertility was not only in the soil, but in all life. She guided the animals, ensuring that flocks could graze and reproduce, that the forests and rivers remained balanced, and that humans could depend on both cultivated and wild resources. Her care was quiet but thorough. She was ever watchful, aware that even small mistakes in tending the land or the creatures upon it could lead to suffering. Humans felt the results of her care long before they recognized her as a goddess. When crops grew in abundance, when livestock thrived, when the seasons returned faithfully, it was because she had watched and guided. her hand invisible but present. The myths of her influence were many. It was said that when Demeter taught humans the secrets of grain, she also taught them the value of respect for the earth and for life itself. Mortals came to understand that to take from the land without care would lead to loss, while patient cultivation would lead to plenty. The story of the first bread, baked from grains she had guided into ripeness, became a symbol of her teaching and of humanity's dependence on the cycles of life. She was a goddess whose gifts could not be forced, whose blessings required understanding and reverence. In her quiet observation, she saw the fragility of human life and the strength that came from working with nature rather than against it. She saw parents teaching children to plant and harvest, communities coming together to store food and share resources, and the occasional failure that reminded humans of their limits. She knew that her role was not only to give life, but to teach its value, to show that abundance came from respect, patience, and careful attention. She was a guardian of sustenance, a protector of life, and a quiet force that ensured the world could continue. Demeter also noticed the ways humans tried to honour her through stories and festivals. Even before she was fully worshipped by organised temples, mortals recognised her presence in the fields and in the cycles of planting and harvest. They would carry sheaves of grain to sacred places, hold dances to celebrate the growth of crops, and sing songs that expressed gratitude and hope. In these acts, Demeter saw the beginning of a bond between gods and humans that would grow deeper over time. She did not demand worship, but she accepted it when offered with sincerity, and she allowed herself to be recognised, even in small ways, by those who depended on her care. Her bond with the earth and its creatures was mirrored by a quiet vigilance over human survival. She understood that the land, the animals, and the people were all connected. A failed harvest could lead to hunger, which could lead to conflict, which could threaten life itself. She intervened subtly, guiding rain clouds, ensuring fertile soil, and blessing those who worked with understanding. Her presence was never loud, but it was constant. In every growing plant, every thriving animal, and every successful harvest, she was there, shaping the world in ways that mortals would come to tell as myths and stories. Even as humans began to depend on her guidance, Demeter never lost her attention to detail or her quiet patience. She watched the smallest shoots emerge from the soil and the largest fields bend under the weight of ripened grain. She observed the changes in weather, the flow of rivers, and the cycles of the moon that influenced the tides and growth. Her knowledge deepened over time, and she understood the ways that mortals could both honour and harm the earth, often without realising it. Her vigilance was not meant to punish, but to teach, to ensure that life continued in balance. And yet, even as she guided humans and nurtured the land, her own life was far from complete. The quiet work of the fields and the teaching of mortals were only a part of her story. The love, grief, and challenges that lay ahead would test her in ways she had not yet imagined. The bond she had begun to form with humans and the earth would be deepened, strained, and transformed by events that could not yet be seen. The seeds she planted in the mortal world, both literal and metaphorical, would grow into experiences that shaped not only the land, but also her heart. In these years, Demeter's role among mortals became clearer. She was more than a distant observer or a silent guardian. She was a teacher, a protector, and a guide. Her influence spread quietly through fields and forests, rivers and plains, through the daily lives of people who depended on her gifts. She became a goddess whose presence was invisible yet essential, whose patience and care shaped the very survival of human life. And as she continued to watch and nurture the bonds she formed with the earth, its creatures, and the people who lived upon it grew stronger, laying the foundation for challenges and joys that would soon define her more fully. Her story among mortals had begun, and though the years would bring joy and sorrow, abundance and hardship, she would remain ever watchful, guiding the growth of life with wisdom and care. The rhythm of the seasons, the cycles of planting and harvest, and the sacredness of fertility were all part of her invisible hand, shaping the world in ways that mortals would only later recognize. And as her influence grew, she prepared, without knowing it, for the events that would test her most deeply. Events that would change not only the earth and its people, but also the very seasons themselves. Though Demeter's life was largely devoted to the earth and its people, she was not untouched by the stirrings of desire and affection that shaped the lives of gods. Love, in its many forms, touched her quietly, sometimes gently, and sometimes with sharp intensity. Her heart, already tender from her care for life itself, experienced the pull of connection, of longing, and of fleeting intimacy that could be as delicate and unpredictable as the first shoots of spring. She learned that even immortals, whose lives stretched far beyond human years, were not immune to the vulnerability of emotion. In the world of the gods, courtship was complicated and often unpredictable. Demeter observed Zeus, her brother, as he claimed his authority and formed relationships that were both alliances and desires. Zeus's consorts were many, each bringing their own influence, charm, and ambition. Demeter, despite her close bond with her family, understood that divine relationships could be fraught with tension. She saw how power, attraction, and status intertwined, and she felt the weight of choice and consequence that came with every connection. Though she was a goddess of life and nurturing, she was also aware that love could bring both joy and sorrow, and that desire could be as much a test of patience as a gift. Her own encounters with affection were often quiet and private. She experienced moments of connection that were brief, like the warmth of sunlight on soil after a storm, leaving traces of longing and reflection. Some relationships with mortals, though fleeting, gave her insight into the fragility and beauty of human love. She felt their hopes, their fears, and their devotion, understanding in those moments the depth of attachment that could bind even short lives to the land. These interactions taught her about desire, not as a distraction, but as an element of life that could coexist with duty and responsibility. Even among the gods, Demeter learned that intimacy was complicated. Affection often carried expectations, and emotional bonds were entwined with divine responsibilities. A single gesture could ripple across Olympus, influencing not only personal feelings, but also the balance of power among siblings and allies. She'd learned to navigate these subtleties, to offer care and attention without losing herself in the desires of others. Her relationships required balance, patience, and a steady heart, for she could not allow passion to disrupt the life she had sworn to protect below. In some stories, her love was quiet and unspoken, a presence that shaped her actions more than her words. She experienced longing for companionship, the wish to share her life and her purpose, and the sorrow of connections that could not be sustained. Mortals and gods alike brought her moments of joy, but each also reminded her of the impermanence of affection when weighed against the endless cycles of seasons and duties. The rhythm of her life, tied to the growth and sustenance of the earth, often overshadowed personal desires, yet these experiences left their mark, deepening her understanding of devotion and loss. Demeter's encounters with Zeus's consorts further illuminated the challenges of divine relationships. She watched them as they sought favour and influence, each vying for attention in ways that were often subtle but powerful. She understood that love in the world of gods was rarely simple or purely emotional. It carried strategy, expectation, and consequence. She also recognized the rare moments of genuine connection amid the political and social complexities, and she reflected on her own capacity for affection, realizing that the strength of her care for the earth sometimes left little room for sustained romantic bonds. Yet love, in its many forms, remained a part of her existence. She experienced fleeting moments with mortals who admired her, sought her guidance, or were touched by her unseen presence. She felt joy when affection was sincere, sorrow when it was denied or lost, and patience when connection required restraint. These experiences were lessons as much as they were pleasures. They taught her that desire could coexist with responsibility, that longing could deepen understanding, and that intimacy, though difficult, was part of the richness of life she nurtured. Her relationships also revealed the tension between personal desire and duty. As she watched fields ripen and rivers flow, she understood that her obligations often took precedence over personal happiness. A moment of passion could not interrupt the care she provided to the world below. Yet the presence of love, even if fleeting or distant, reminded her that life was complex, that emotion could inspire both wisdom and caution, and that connection could exist alongside responsibility. In this balance, Demeter found resilience, a quiet strength that shaped her both as a goddess and as a being capable of empathy. Some myths hint at her quiet attractions and unspoken bonds. Stories that speak of desire restrained by duty, longing tempered by wisdom. In these tales, she walks among mortals, unseen yet felt, her heart touched by the presence of life around her. She experiences the small, human moments of love and connection that mirror the care she gives to the earth. A gentle touch, a glance of understanding, a fleeting warmth that reminds her of the fragility and beauty of life. These moments, though often invisible in the grand tapestry of the gods, shaped her understanding of emotion, devotion, and the complexity of existence. Demeter's romantic experiences, though often overshadowed by her responsibilities, also prepared her for future trials. She understood that attachment could bring both joy and sorrow, that affection could strengthen or challenge, and that the bonds between beings, whether mortal or divine, were never simple. This awareness deepened her empathy and patience, qualities that would later prove essential when grief and loss touched her life in ways far greater than fleeting romance. The lessons of love, desire, and connection were woven into her character, shaping her response to all forms of attachment, care, and devotion. Her quiet life among mortals and gods alike, filled with observation and occasional intimacy, was a testament to her balance. She could love and nurture without losing focus on her duties. She could experience longing without letting it interfere with her purpose. And she could witness the complexities of divine courtship, human affection, and fleeting desire without allowing her own heart to be consumed. In this delicate equilibrium, Demeter learned the subtle power of connection, the ability to influence, care, and respond to life while remaining rooted in her responsibilities. Yet even as love touched her life, she remained aware that greater events were approaching. The bonds she formed, the experiences of affection and longing, were threads in a larger tapestry. They shaped her empathy, her patience, and her understanding of devotion and loss, preparing her for challenges that would test her heart more deeply than any courtship or fleeting connection ever could. The love she experienced was never wasted, for it strengthened her and deepened her capacity to care, qualities that would soon be tested in ways she had not yet imagined. In those years, Demeter's life reflected both the quiet joys and the complex realities of love and connection. She walked the line between desire and duty, experiencing the subtle influence of romance while remaining steadfast in her care for the earth and its people. She understood the fragility of attachment and the endurance required to balance affection with responsibility. These lessons, learned through quiet observation, fleeting passion, and careful restraint, became part of her essence, shaping not only her heart, but also the way she would face loss, grief, and the profound challenges that awaited her in the seasons to come. And so, even as she nurtured the fields, guided the cycles of harvest, and watched over mortals, Demeter's own life was touched by the complexities of love. Her understanding of desire, devotion, and longing grew alongside her wisdom and patience. The experiences of intimacy, fleeting though they sometimes were, prepared her for a time when loss would touch her more deeply than she could yet imagine. The threads of romance, attraction, and connection were woven quietly into her existence, and in them lay the preparation for a sorrow that would one day shape not only her life, but the rhythms of the earth itself. Demeter's life, devoted to the earth and its people, was forever changed the day her daughter, Persephone, disappeared. Persephone, bright and curious, had grown under her mother's care, learning the rhythms of the seasons and the gifts of the land. She was a reflection of Demeter's own nurturing spirit, full of life and energy, yet gentle and attentive to the world around her. They shared a bond that went beyond affection, a connection that intertwined their very beings. Every seed, every sprouting shoot, seemed to mirror the love between mother and daughter. Then Hades, lord of the underworld, claimed Persephone for his own. The abduction was swift and without warning, leaving Demeter in a state of shock and unbearable grief. The earth seemed to echo her sorrow. She searched tirelessly, moving through forests, hills and plains, calling for her daughter. Her cries carried on the winds. Mortals sensed the disturbance, even if they did not understand its cause. Birds fell silent in the trees, rivers slowed, and the first signs of despair appeared among the fields and the harvests. Her grief was profound, not a fleeting sadness, but a sorrow that shook the foundation of the earth itself. Wherever she walked, crops withered beneath her feet, the air grew heavy, and the land seemed to mourn alongside her. Mortals felt her absence as much as they felt their own hunger. Famine spread across villages, towns and cities, and those who relied on the earth's bounty struggled to survive. They prayed to unseen forces, hoping for relief, not knowing that their suffering was a reflection of Demeter's deep loss. She had become a goddess of sorrow as well as growth, her grief turning the fertile land to barrenness. Through her relentless search, Demeter's determination became clear. She refused to rest or be persuaded to stop until she found Persephone. Even the other gods, powerful and immortal, recognized the intensity of her love and sorrow. Zeus, her brother, watched as the world below began to suffer, and understood that Demeter's grief could not be ignored. Yet the abduction had been done by Hades, and the lord of the underworld was steadfast, unwilling to release his chosen companion easily. The tension between them became a struggle not just of power, but of love and duty, reflecting the bonds that shaped the lives of gods and mortals alike. The bond between mother and daughter was unlike any other. Persephone, though still young, carried within her a spark of her mother's care for life and the earth. She was both resilient and tender, aware of her mother's love even from the depths of the underworld. Demeter's resolve was unwavering. She could not allow her child to remain in a place where light and growth were scarce, where the natural cycles of life were inverted. Her sorrow gave her strength, and her love gave her clarity. She knew that the survival of mortals, the continuity of life, and the honour of the earth itself depended on her actions. As the days and months passed, the world suffered more deeply. Fields remained bare, trees refused to bloom, and the rivers carried only stagnant water. Humans, confused and frightened, watched the seasons fail to turn. Demeter's grief was a force of nature, unstoppable and visible, a lesson in the power of love and the consequences of loss. Mortals who once relied on her guidance now understood the fragility of their dependence. The earth, the animals, and the people all felt the absence of her nurturing presence. Every withered plant and every empty granary reflected the intensity of her sorrow. Even in the depths of despair, Demeter's determination did not waver. She knew she could not confront Hades through force alone. The lord of the underworld was as immovable as the rocks that lined his kingdom. Instead, she sought negotiation, wisdom, and patience. Her understanding of the earth, the seasons, and the balance of life gave her the insight to approach the situation not with anger alone, but with careful thought. She realized that compromise might be necessary, but she would not accept a solution that separated her from her daughter more than absolutely required. The negotiation with Hades was long and delicate. The lord of the underworld, accustomed to his own power and the darkness of his realm, was both firm and cunning. Yet Demeter's love, sorrow, and wisdom created a balance neither could ignore. Through counsel and subtle insistence, she demanded that Persephone have a connection to the world of light and life. She invoked the natural order, the seasons, and the rights of a mother to care for her child. Slowly the terms were agreed upon, a compromise that would shape the world for generations. Persephone would divide her time between the underworld and her mother. The cycles of the seasons themselves would reflect this arrangement, a visible rhythm of reunion and separation. During the months when Persephone remained with Hades, the world would endure winter, a time of barrenness and rest. When she returned to her mother, spring would bloom, summer would grow, and the harvest would follow. The cycle became not only a natural rhythm, but a story of love, loss, and reunion, a testament to the bond between mother and daughter. Demeter's grief had been transformed into guidance, her sorrow into a force that shaped life itself. Mortals learned to honour her not only for her gifts, but for her unyielding devotion, and the world itself responded to her care in ways both visible and subtle. Even as the seasons settled into their eternal cycle, Demeter's heart remained attentive. She continued to nurture the earth, to guide the growth of crops, and to watch over humanity, all the while aware of the absence and presence of her daughter. The experience deepened her understanding of love, of patience, and of the fragile balance that connects life, growth, and sustenance. She had learned that devotion required endurance, that grief could shape creation, and that a mother's love could influence the very rhythms of the natural world. Demeter's story during this time was not one of finality, but of transformation. Her sorrow gave way to action, her love to resolve, and her patience to wisdom. The mortal world, once suffering from famine and neglect, began to flourish again, guided by the knowledge that the earth itself was alive with care. Humans came to honour the rhythms of the seasons, the cycles of planting and harvest, and the sacredness of life and fertility, all in recognition of the goddess who had sacrificed so much for the return of her daughter. In these events, the depth of Demeter's character became clear. She was more than a nurturer of crops and teacher of mortals. She was a mother whose love could shape the world, whose grief could influence the very seasons, and whose determination could negotiate with gods whose powers seemed absolute, Her devotion to Persephone was a lesson in the interplay between love, loss, and life itself. A reminder that even divine beings were bound by the ties of family and care. And so, even as the compromise with Hades established the cycle of seasons, Demeter's life continued, full of purpose, vigilance, and care. The earth responded to her guidance, the mortals adapted to the rhythm of winter and spring, and the bond between mother and daughter endured, reflecting the deeper truths of life, devotion, and the interconnection of all living things. Her sorrow and perseverance had reshaped the natural world, leaving a legacy that would be remembered in myth, in ritual, and in the turning of the seasons themselves. After the return of Persephone each year, Demeter's role as the goddess of agriculture and the natural order continued with quiet diligence. She moved through the fields and forests, guiding the growth of crops, the health of animals, and the balance of the seasons. Mortals relied on her without always knowing it, planting and harvesting according to the rhythms she maintained. Her influence was felt in the richness of grain, the blossoming of orchards, and the survival of those who depended on the land. The earth itself became a living testament to her care, a mirror of her wisdom and patience. Rituals and festivals soon grew around her presence, as humans sought to honour her guidance and show gratitude for her blessings. Harvest festivals were established, celebrations of life and sustenance that marked the turning of seasons. She observed quietly as mortals gathered, carrying the first fruits of the season to sacred places, singing songs of thanks, and performing dances that honoured the cycles of growth and decay. These ceremonies were more than tradition. They were a recognition of the invisible hand that nurtured the land and ensured survival. Demeter's gifts were enduring, and through these festivals, her influence became woven into the very culture of humanity. In temples and fields alike, offerings were made in her name. Grains, fruits, and flowers were left as signs of devotion, symbols of respect for the goddess who maintained life's rhythm. Mortals came to understand the connection between their labour and her guidance, the importance of care, patience, and respect for the earth. Their gratitude, sincere and constant, reinforced the bond between humans and the divine. Even when she moved unseen, her presence was acknowledged in the abundance of harvests and the survival of communities. Demeter's wisdom, developed over centuries, was reflected in the balance she maintained between giving and demanding, nurturing and instructing. She knew that life required attention, and that abundance without care could not last. Her guidance was subtle but firm. She allowed humans to experience both success and failure, knowing that lessons were learned not only in the flourishing of crops, but also in the consequences of neglect. Mortals who respected the earth and its cycles thrived, while those who disregarded them faced hardship. Through these patterns, she taught understanding, responsibility, and reverence for life. Her resilience, shaped through experiences of love, grief, and duty, became part of her enduring presence. The abduction of Persephone, the years of famine, and the challenges of guiding mortals had strengthened her resolve. She had learned that power was not only in creation, but in patience, endurance, and understanding the subtle rhythms of life. Even when faced with loss or difficulty, she remained steadfast, guiding the earth, teaching humanity, and maintaining the natural cycles that sustained life. Her quiet strength became a model of endurance, a demonstration that vigilance, care, and wisdom could shape the world more profoundly than force or domination. The cycles of the seasons, dictated by her bond with Persephone, became a living legacy. Spring, summer, autumn, and winter were not just natural events. They were markers of her love, her devotion, and her power to influence the world in ways both subtle and profound. Mortals observed these cycles, created stories, and passed down myths that explained the patterns they saw. Demeter's presence was embedded in the very fabric of life, her influence inseparable from the growth of plants, the health of animals, and the continuity of human communities. Even beyond the cycles of planting and harvest, her story persisted. She shaped understanding of life and death, teaching that growth and decay were natural, necessary, and interconnected. Through her example, mortals learned to honour the earth, to appreciate the gifts of sustenance, and to recognise that every seed, every sprout, and every harvest was part of a larger cycle. Her quiet victories were evident in the flourishing of life, the gratitude of humans, and the perpetuation of rituals that honoured her guidance. In her observation of both mortals and immortals, Demeter maintained a careful balance. She witnessed generations of humans rise and fall, empires and villages come and go, yet her work continued without pause. She understood the impermanence of individual lives and the enduring presence of the natural world. In this perspective, she found a quiet joy. Her care shaped the future even as she moved through the present, leaving a lasting imprint on those who depended on her. Each harvest, each festival, each grateful offering was a reminder that her influence extended beyond the immediate and visible, touching both the mortal and divine realms in ways that persisted through time. Her influence on human culture grew quietly but powerfully. Stories of her teachings, her grief, and her care became part of oral tradition, passed from one generation to the next. Mortals came to understand the sacredness of agriculture, the importance of cycles, and the enduring connection between life, loss, and renewal. Demeter's legacy was not only in the fields of grain and blossoming orchards, but in the values and wisdom imparted to humans: patience, respect, care, and understanding of the balance of life. Even in the divine realm, her presence remained significant. Other gods recognized her wisdom, her steady strength, and her influence on both mortals and nature. She was a quiet force, one whose actions shaped a world without need for grand displays or conflict. Her authority was earned through patience, nurturing, and an understanding that power could be expressed in the preservation of life as effectively as in its command. Demeter's guidance ensured that the cycles of the natural world continued, that mortals were sustained, and that the balance of life remained intact. Her story, embedded in the rhythms of the earth, also taught the deeper truths of life and mortality. She showed that care, love, and attention could shape the world, that grief could be transformed into action, and that the bonds between beings, whether mother and daughter, mortal and goddess, or earth and human, were central to the continuity of life. Her presence was a quiet victory in itself, a reminder that endurance, wisdom, and nurturing could influence the course of the world more profoundly than force or ambition alone. And so, Demeter's life continued, not as a tale of final triumph or conquest, but as a story of enduring influence. She remained ever watchful over the earth, guiding growth, maintaining cycles, and ensuring that life could continue in balance. Mortals honoured her in harvests and festivals through gratitude, song, and ritual. The earth responded to her care, the seasons turned according to her guidance, and the lessons of patience, responsibility, and respect endured through generations. Her legacy was not always visible, yet it was profound. Every grain of wheat, every blossoming tree, every cycle of growth and decay carried her influence. The bond she shared with Persephone shaped the seasons and taught humanity about loss, reunion, and the balance of life. Her wisdom, resilience, and nurturing presence left an imprint that could not be erased, a quiet testament to the power of care, devotion, and understanding. In the end, Demeter's story was one of life itself. Growth and harvest, love and loss, patience, and vigilance. Her influence extended beyond her own time, embedded in the earth, the cycles of the seasons, and the hearts of humans who depended on her gifts. She remained a goddess of life, of sustenance, and of the natural order, her presence enduring in the quiet victories of survival, the rhythms of growth, and the unbroken bond between the earth and those who walked upon it. Through all time, Demeter's care shaped the world, leaving a lasting legacy that would never fade, a testament to the power of wisdom, devotion, and the enduring cycle of life and death.